Yeah, and that also introduces our third data point here. One of the other data points that I found interesting was how much satisfaction levels with brand safety and viewability tools dropped when you compared their performance on traditional media like mobile or desktop to emerging media like in-game, in-app, CTV. On the brand safety side, that satisfaction level dropped nearly 40 points when you went
Mhm.
from traditional to emerging media, and it was nearly 30 points on the viewability side. And you mentioned that JavaScript may not be appropriate for every environment. On some level, it seems kind of obvious that it's going to be harder to spot unsuitable content on new media types. And there's a lot of technical reasons why you can't just lift and shift from one type to the next. But 40 points is such a big drop in confidence. It's not stopping brands and agencies from putting money into those mediums. So how do they square that circle? How do they do that despite the churn risk that we talked about? What do you think, Justin?
I think that the problem there is that in many cases, the signal that they need in order to do the type of analysis that they're used to doing, the way that they're used to doing it is just not available. So, for example, to do contextual analysis, you typically need to have direct access to the content of a page. And that's how you do a brand safety analysis. Well, if you're in an in-app environment, you usually don't have access to the content of what's on the app page. It's something that needs to be represented indirectly some way through either some metadata that you have about the app itself, like ratings or categorization or reviews or some such thing, or sometimes there's a URL that will be passed that's supposed to be a web page representation of the same sort of content that's in the app. So you go and you crawl that web page and you get an approximation, but it's indirect. It's not a direct analysis. And so you're left with just doing analysis based on whatever metadata you have access to. And so, the capability of doing the necessary analysis is just not there in many cases. And once again, I think the incumbents knew this and they tried to sort of fill the gap with sort of halfway tools, but maybe they sort of overrepresented their capabilities. I think there's a real hunger and thirst, both for people who are more transparent about the limitations, but also for people who are innovators and who are trying to figure out ways around the deficiencies in signal to actually get some of that more robust signal that would be necessary to do things like brand safety analysis.
And Lindsay, I talked a little bit about the risk and reward of advertisers and agencies working in these emerging environments where there might not be that kind of signal to make for, good contextual analysis. Have you got any thoughts about like why they perceive the reward as being that much higher? Is it really just about the volume of eyeballs that are on these new environments?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely that. I mean, if you think about just obviously, if we give one example of CTV, right? There's just been this overall shift from native to CTV, right? So, or linear video, I should say. With that shift, there's just so much power with CTV in general. And so anytime you have a new environment where there are a ton of eyeballs, a ton of attention, there's going to be that drive to spend there. The problem is that, and we've seen this historically with, IBT as well, is that with advertising dollars shifting to a new environment, then the industry has to catch up in terms of like, how do we actually address this new environment? And I think based off of what Justin was saying, a key thing that happens here is that the signals that you have from, a desktop, a standard web environment versus CTV, it's a very different experience. And also the underlying technology is so different, which also impacts the ultimate signal that you can have for detection, right? So ultimately, while dollars will shift, it takes time for technology to actually adapt. And you can't necessarily have the same solution that works in one environment work exactly the same in another because it's an entirely different experience. And I think the thing is that while dollars shift, it takes time for there to actually be that adjustment in terms of solutions to actually address that environment and to be able to do it properly and to be transparent about whatever those limitations are so that there isn't an expectation that, oh, yeah, it's going to work exactly the same. You're going to get the exact same signals and the exact same outputs. That's typically not how it works. And I think providing that transparency to advertisers is a key aspect of it. So you have aligned expectations in terms of what ultimately they're going to be able to get and receive at any point in time.
And by the time the, protection technology even catches up, there might be a whole new place that ads are running. I can't wait for the day where people wearing those fancy smart glasses have to contend with ads that are running on those. And how are we going to protect from that kind of situation where it's very real world implications for what do you see and what ad is running immediately next to it based on what the glasses perceive, just to pick a potential future marketplace at random. Before we wrap up, is there anything that either of you want to add to the conversation?
I would just say that following on the availability of signals, one thing, in addition to being open and, trying new technologies, trying new partners, looking for greater signal, greater transparency, buyers can actually influence the situation a bit with their dollars. So if you think about the availability of signal in new environments, like, CTV, I wouldn't really call CTV a new environment, but it's still a growing environment that's developing rapidly based on demand. The demand for CTV and quality CTV at times seems to outstrip the supply. And so one of the things that you see is that buyers who in other areas are much more finicky about what they're willing to buy based on what measurement is feasible in those environments, what verification and what signals, they kind of relax those standards. And so, at the same time that we want the technologies themselves to innovate on how to collect standards, we also need that sort of strong assertion and pressure from the buyers that they will not buy unless the sufficient signal is released by the suppliers to enable accurate measurement and verification along the lines of the standards that they're used to exercising in other environments.
Which may or may not ever exist.
Yeah, that's true. So, I mean, as long as people keep buying without demanding equal access to signal, the best measurement or verification organization will have to deal with what is presently available, which of course is great for innovation. So, of course, we'll keep innovating and trying to figure out new ways to do things, but it does create a higher bar, and a higher bar that the incumbents, have to leap over. And again, one of the reasons why they probably haven't done so great in certain environments.
So I'm just going to agree with you completely. I think that's a really great point in terms of the pressure that the buy side can be placing on this in terms of innovation, because ultimately the market will respond to whatever brands are demanding.
So, well, thank you both for taking part in this conversation. I appreciate your time and looking forward to chatting with you about the next Iris report whenever we get that ready to go. So, thank you,
Right.
everybody.